You're listening to the Arts Report on YouTube. Local artist Rodney Graham is a member of the unofficial and controversially labeled Vancouver School of Post-Conceptual Artists. Controversial because there isn't unanimous agreement about the group's members, nor on whether it is an actual group. Anyway, Graham is currently showing a large backlit photographic work called The Lighthouse Keeper with Lighthouse Model 1955, alongside a film by artist Tacita Dean called Disappearance at Sea, with also historical objects and materials from the Vancouver Maritime Museum. Correspondent Sara Lapsley of the Arts Report met with Rodney Graham in his home, and they went into the details of the individual pieces. Here he is talking about the origin of this work.
I did the piece, exhibited it last year, a couple of venues, and Kate Rimmer, I guess, had the idea, the curator. At the Charles A. Scott Gallery had the idea of putting these two works together, a work by Tacita Dean dealing with the lighthouses, with a lighthouse, images, a film of a lighthouse, kind of a structural film about a lighthouse, the light going on, and the sun going down, the light going down, and then the light coming on. And there's two different kinds of light. And my piece, which deals with a lighthouse keeper in a lighthouse, the kitchen of his lighthouse, making a model. But I'd made the work before, and it was her idea to put the two works together with some supporting documentary material about lighthouse keeping on the West Coast.
So for your piece,
it's called Lighthouse Keeper with Lighthouse Model.
And so you had built the set in your own studio. It's quite beautiful.
I built the set in a friend's space, because my studio at the time wasn't big enough, although my new studio would have been adequate for something like that. I generally build sets and create the scenario myself, usually in the context of my studio or some location. And the images, they always include myself as the main subject, so they're kind of in this performative kind of realm. I work with a highly skilled photographer working in a large format area, Robert Kezier. So I kind of produce and do the set direction and the kind of acting, so-called, in these works. I've been doing them for a few years now. And usually they feature myself and often maybe another character or two characters in a sort of dramatic scenario. In this case, I wanted to make a piece about a lighthouse keeper, somebody kind of an artist, an amateur artist working in the context of his domestic situation, in this case a kitchen of a lighthouse, and the lighthouse keeper is making a model of another lighthouse. The lighthouse that he's making a model of he's an American lighthouse keeper, and he's making a model of the Minos Ledge Lighthouse in Boston Harbor, which is represented on the buttons of the lighthouse keeper's uniforms and all the insignia of the American lighthouse keeper's uniforms in the past. So it has this kind of reflexive kind of character, that, the fact that he's inside a lighthouse making a model of a lighthouse. It's a representation of the lighthouse. It's also represented in his uniform insignia, and you can see it in the photograph because I did a replica of a U.S. lighthouse keeper's uniform of the 50s. This piece is set in the 50s, and the buttons are vintage buttons, which show this lighthouse. And he has picture postcards on the wall of this historic lighthouse that he's making a model of.
Wow, well, it's an incredibly beautiful piece. It's huge in 2 panels, and it's a light box. Is that right? So light's coming from behind it.
Backlit transparency, yeah. In 2 panels. I always worked in a diptych format, or diptych or triptych format, because I want to make these pictures life size, and the largest enlargement you can do photographically is about 6 by 10 feet. So in order to make this the required 12 feet wide, I had to make it as a diptych, and I always use the break as a kind of structural kind of component. In this case, my feet, I'm sitting in the lighthouse keeper's kitchen, and my feet are in the stove, kind of warming my feet in the stove, taking a break in this model making activity, having a coffee, and my feet kind of cross this division of the diptych. So I always use that in a kind of slightly humorous way, or try to work it in a slightly humorous way. The break in the film make it very, very obvious, the break between the 2 panels. It's about 9 feet by 12 feet, the two pictures together.
So you mentioned Tacita Dean's film, which plays in a separate room, and you said it was about 10 minutes. Could you tell me just a little bit about her as an artist? I know she's a very well-known British artist.
Yeah, she's a well-known British artist living in Berlin. I met her actually when I was on a DAD fellowship in Berlin in 2000, I think the year 2000. She works mostly in 16 millimeter. Her installations are 16 millimeter projections. She's done a lot of work dealing with images of the sea. She did a piece in the past about, what's his name, Donald Croston, the guy who supposedly was supposed to sail solo around the world, but then he faked it. Died somewhere along the way, I think, too. She made a piece, and she made another piece about being a very early piece where she played a stowaway on a ship. So she's dealt with images of the sea, and usually her works are film, very meticulously mounted film installations. Not video projections of films, but actual 16 millimeter films with loopers. And anyway, I met her, and she became a good friend of mine while I was in Berlin, and I keep in contact a little bit with her. So it was nice to exhibit with her. I know we share a similar interest.
And you said that both your piece and hers are supported by some other documentation about lighthouse keeping on the West Coast.
Kate brought in some, Kate Rimmer, the curator, brought in some documentary material. A lot of things kind of bearing on local lore or local history of lighthouses in British Columbia, and some stuff written based on research by this guy named Rodney Graham, whose book I'm actually reading in the photograph. The book that I'm reading is open at a page showing a photograph that was a direct inspiration for the photograph that I took. It's a photograph of a lighthouse keeper sitting with his feet up on a chair, warming himself by his stove and reading a book. So there's a doubly reflexive kind of aspect to the picture there. And the book is actually split at the same. The book is open at a page, and I think the photograph goes across two pages, and it's kind of divided in a similar way that my picture is divided. So there's a kind of reference to that kind of a mise en abîme thing happening. But anyway, she included some work, including some documentary material coming from his research.
Don't miss the Arts Report on CiTR Radio in Vancouver, 101.9 FM. That's Wednesdays at 5 p.m. We're also streaming online at CiTR.ca every Wednesday at 5. And don't miss our podcast, which you can find, at CiTR.ca.